currently the morning of April 1st, and I made day 2 of the $3,500 buy-in Seminole Hard Rock World Poker Tour Championship event. I have 50,000 in chips going into Big Blind 1200 from a 30,000 chip starting stack. However, it did take me a total of 3 bullets to get here, sadly enough. I'm going to let you guys know exactly how my day went with a couple of different hands. So the first hand, this was really early in the day. My starting table was pretty soft. For the event, it was probably fine, but as a general rule of thumb for 3,500, it was a really good table draw. The only player that I really knew was Alex Vanovsky, who was on my direct right. He's a very skilled cash game reg and used to play high stakes tournaments a lot more, but now is mostly a cash game player. Not really many other notables or anything at the table, so it was a pretty good table, especially having the only other good player that I personally recognize on my direct right. It's always a very good thing to have. So the very first hand is about level 3 of the tournament. It's Big Blind 150 with a 25 ante. Folded me in mid position 2, and I raise in the cutoff to 400 with King 6 of diamonds. It's a bit of a loose open, but with how soft the table is playing, especially as I had mostly tight and fairly passive players behind, I'm very comfortable with this open. Hijack 3-bets me to 1,050 and it folds back to me. So in this kind of spot, generally King 6 suited doesn't really play very well against a 3-bet. However, with the odds that I'm getting, he 3-bet to 1,050. It's only 600 more to me between blinds and antes, my bet and his bet. I'm getting very good odds on a call, around 3.5 to 1 or so. So because of that and because of how deep effective we are, I believe that this is a very typical call. So of course I call after it folds to me. So the pot size now is 25.50. The flop is 6 of clubs, 7 of clubs, 9 of hearts. I check and he checks back. And when he checks back, I expect him to have a lot more, ace-jack suited, ace-queen, ace-king, some pretty rare aces, kings, and queens, but mostly I expect him to have some ace-highs. And I expect to have the best hand here a lot. So depending on what the turn is, I'm probably going to be betting out to protect my equity. But I also, depending on the turn, don't mind having some check raises or even some check calls. So the turn is pretty much gin for me. It's the king of clubs. So the king of clubs brings 3 to a flush out there, which isn't a good thing. However, if he did have ace high with 2 clubs or just any, flush draw, he's probably c-betting. So I should almost always have the best hand here. I check with the intention of check raising. Downside of checking with the intention of check raising is that he might check back some hands that have some equity. Like maybe he has ace, queen, queen of clubs and decides to check back. However, the main reason why I'm checking here to check raise is because I believe that if he does have that type of hand, that he's going to bet. So I can set up a nice value check raise against those types of hands. So he bets 1,600 and I raise to 5,300. Notice my sizing. I'm going more than 3x his sizing, and the reason why I'm doing this is because of what I think he will, in general, tend to have here. I think, in general, he's going to have ace-king or ace-queen with the club, hand like either of those, and I don't really think he's going to be folding very much. And if he does fold, I don't really think my sizing matters that much. Also, something that's really important to always be thinking about is your check raise size needs to be compared to the size of the pot. So when I make it 5,300, I'm only raising 3,700 more, which the pot size between the 2,500 that's in there plus his 1,600 and my 1,600, the pot size is 5,700. So I'm essentially raising about 55, maybe 60% pot right around there. So my sizing, while seemingly slightly big, is actually, only around half pot. So it's a pretty typical sizing and a sizing that I have to go to protect and to get value from. Good mixture of both. So he calls. Pot size is now 13,150. The river is a 4 of clubs, which this is a terrible card for me. I can't really bet and expect to get called by worse. If he has ace king without a club or aces without a club and I bet, I don't really expect him to call. So if I do bet, I'm not really accomplishing anything outside of maybe possibly preventing him from bluffing. But as he was a fairly recreational player seemingly, I didn't really think that he'd be capable of bluffing here with many hands. So because of that, I decided to check. And he bets 8,900 into 13,000. So he bets about 75% pot, right around there. And when he bets the sizing, I'm getting 2 1/3 to 1 on my money. So I need to be reasonably confident that I have the best hand when I call. And the only way that that's true is if he's bluffing a decent amount. So he needs to be bluffing a pretty high percentage of the time, which I just did not believe that this would be the case. So I ended up folding and got shown red aces. So this is one of the hard parts about poker to some degree. You could look at this in the absolute sense that I made a bad fold because my opponent bluffed me. Or how you should be looking at it is instead, what is my opponent's range here, and is he bluffing enough based off his sizing and everything else that we can justify calling? So let's add more information on him, and I could have picked up a sizing tell or timing tell or something like that. Then yeah, I should be calling. However, since I didn't have enough information where I could make a soul read that he would be bluffing a really high percentage of the time here, I believe that this is a pretty typical and pretty easy fold and the correct decision, even though I was bluffed. And you need to really always be thinking in terms of what is my opponent's range here and how should I be continuing against him because of that. Okay, so the next hand occurred 3 levels later. Big blind 400 with a 50 chip ante. We were playing 19,000 effective because I have dropped down to 19K. I'd lost that king 6 hand. I'd also flopped a set that I had to fold, although it wasn't a very interesting hand. It was a pretty typical hand. Ended up running out 4 flush and they led, and I had to fold, sadly enough. So I'm down to 19,000 in chips. Table draw is still really good. Undergun, who is a reg that I play with pretty regularly in Vegas, although I know he's not necessarily a professional player. He more dabbles, and he tends to run on the fairly to very tight side as a general rule of thumb. So he's under the gun and raises to 1,000. Mid position 1 calls, and I have ace of clubs, king of diamonds in the cutoff, and 3-bet to 3,700. Folds to under the gun, who calls, and the MP1 folds. So the pot size is 9,450. So the flop is king of spades, queen of spades, 3 of diamonds. He checks, and I c-bet 3,300. The reason why I'm c-betting so small here is I don't really have that much back anyways. I only have about 15,000 in chips back. So because of that, I'm not really strongly incentivized to bet very large. And also on top of that, I need to protect my bluffs, and my bluffs need to make sure that they can get through without needing to have tons of folds. His range should hit this fairly hard. And the bluffs I'm probably most apt to have would be like ace jack off. That would probably be the main bluff that I have. And I want to be able to protect that bluff. And I also want to make sure that I'm giving him fairly good odds with the majority of my range, since the majority of my range is pretty strong here. Even my king-queen off bluff, just flop 2 pair. I've got aces, I've got kings, I've got queens. I'm not really going to have that many checkbacks here either. I can even c-bet small here with a hand like ace-queen and check back turns, and check back turns with some other of my slightly vulnerable hands as well. So I don't really have a strong incentive to bet very large, which is why I bet 1/3 pot. So I bet 3,300 into 9,400, and he calls. So the pot size now is about 16,000. Turns the 8 of diamonds, bringing a backdoor flush draw. He checks. And this is where I actually have a pretty difficult decision. It doesn't seem that difficult on the surface. It's, we have top pair, top kicker. We have 75% pot. It's pretty easy jam. However, it's not just that. when we jam here, we need to really be thinking about what does he get to the turn with that he can actually call my shove with. So let's say he has a hand like queen jack or ace queen. These are like the main two hands that I really beat. Do I think he will call a jam with in this spot? I honestly didn't believe that he would. Maybe ace queen, but really I didn't believe that he would. And that's really, really key on the turn here. Something else that's pretty key on the turn here is when he has a hand like Jack 10 suited, yes, I do believe that exactly is calling flop. However, when he has a hand like, ace X of spades, essentially, so ace 10 of spades, ace jack of spades, maybe some suited wheel aces, those types of hands, I strongly believe that he's check jamming. And if he has jack 10 of spades, he's definitely check jamming as well. If he has jack 9 of spades, he's check jamming, 9 10 of spades, so all of his straight and flush draws and his nut flush draws are all check jamming. But I also believe that he's probably check jamming his king queen suiteds as well. So while I definitely beat jack 10 suited, if I jam, I don't even think jack 10 suited is calling due to how much of a jam it is. So I don't really have that much of an incentive to jam turn because I don't really think I'm getting that much value from anything. And while I couldn't necessarily think of what I would get value from outside of exactly king jack suited if he decided to peel that preflop, which I wasn't certain that he would, there certainly are some hands that I lose to. And now this may seem a little surprising, but I believe that if he had a hand like pocket aces or pocket kings, that he would probably be pretty apt to just call preflop and to try to set a trap or keep my range wide, just based off of like playing with him and those kinds of facts. So because I had some pretty specific reads on him, I could essentially get out of line here by checking back. So after a pretty long tank, I decided to check turn. I probably tanked like maybe a minute, 45 seconds, something like that. So I checked back. So the river is a pretty terrible card. It's a 9 of clubs. And he lead jams for 12,000, putting me all in. And based off of what I said earlier, I don't really think that I have any decision outside of folding. And the main reason being is that I just don't beat really any flush draws except for maybe 8-9 suited, possibly. But even that might just check jam flop instead of check calling. Maybe like 7-8 suited as well. So maybe I beat a couple of flush draw combos, just 8-9 suited and 7-8 suited. All of his straight and flush draw combos definitely check jam. And now I lose to jack 10. And I didn't think that he'd be capable of turning queen jack into a bluff. So because of those factors, I thought that this was a pretty easy but not very happy fold. So I ended up running into him later after I busted from that table and asked him what he had, and he told me that he had flopped a set. So I was very fortunate that I was able to check back the turn and got a good card on the river that enabled me to find a very, very tight but correct fold. So speaking of busting, so I busted after running ace-king into jacks, got it all in pre-flop for 25,000 in chipped spot, and lost. And then I went to dinner. So after dinner, the upside about this tournament is that it's a reentry. The downside about this tournament is that when you re-enter multiple times and do not cash, it gets a little bit expensive. So I bust, go to dinner, and after dinner, I re-enter. I end up getting fairly short after 3-betting jacks and losing to ace-king. Then I busted that bullet with some time left in re-entry by 3-bet jamming queen 10 suited in the small blind for 15 big blinds versus a very loose aggressive late position opens. Pretty typical 3-bet jam. And they ended up calling with king 9 suited, which is a little bit loose of a call, but they ended up being correct and winning the flip. So for bullet 3, I almost immediately doubled, or near doubled. I essentially went from 30,000 to like 55,000, like the second or third hand at table. The way the hand played out was it was big blind 600. Under the gun opens, and under the gun is I believe he's a young European reg. I vaguely recognized him, and he definitely had a strong accent, but I didn't really know who he was. And, young European in the United States playing a series, very likely a very good mid to high stakes online reg, or like an EPT, a very good EPT circuit reg. But since I didn't really know who he was, it's pretty unlikely that he knew who I was. So while I do usually 3-bet this, under the gun versus under the gun 1, I decided to call instead. So he opens a 1500 and I have pocket queens and call. Folds to mid position 1, who is a very, very loose aggressive recreational player. He 3-bets to, I believe it was like 5400. Folds all the way back to me, and I just go all in for about 23k effective, having him covered. I had 30, he had about 23-ish. And he calls. And I honestly think this guy is getting in like 8s here and like ace-jack suited. So I actually got pretty unlucky that he ended up having ace-king. But thankfully I ended up winning the flip and dodging firing bullet 4. That would have been slightly painful to have to fire 4 bullets into such a great structured and such a soft tournament. But, it's part of playing tournaments for a living, that if, it's really important that you're able to play as much volume as possible without being, fairly silly or loose with bankroll management or anything like that. That's why I'm backed, and that's why when I do play these higher stakes tournaments, it's also why I sell a decent amount. This enables me to play a decent amount more volume, to try to spread out the variance a bit, and allows me to fire as much as required. Anyway, so I ended up making day 2 with 50,000 in chips going into big blind 1200. Hope you guys have enjoyed this episode so far with our first handful of hand histories. Most of the episodes in the future will tend to involve anywhere between, I would say, 1 to 5 hand histories. I'm going to try to keep this, fairly hand history heavy, since I won't really get to give you guys that much other content. Obviously, I'll take some video footage of, the casinos and locations that I'm at and that kind of stuff. But a lot of casinos don't really allow video footage at the table, and I especially can't really risk that while playing tournaments. I don't want to get disqualified from a tournament and lose out on, my equity in it. I will also be playing cash games as well, mostly 2-5-10 PLO, 5-5-10 PLO, maybe some 5-10 no limit or even some 10-20 no limit. So as I'm able to get more video footage and stuff, I will certainly be trying to do as much other content as possible, but expect this to have a decent amount of hand histories and more just discussion about what goes on at the tournaments, on the side as well. Didn't really, haven't really had anything too interesting occur here. I played a 2K side event and a 1K side event and played the 3500, and I thought the 2K was pretty uneventful for the most part. I ended up just losing a flip in kind of a silly fashion. If I'd run deeper in that, I probably would have, done some hands and stuff from it, but I didn't really think it was that important or that interesting. I played the 2K on 0 sleep after taking a red eye in, and, that wasn't the best thing to do, but I definitely played well. I was very happy with all the decisions I made, and I certainly would have skipped it if I thought I was overly tired. So yeah, I guess I'm going to go play day 2 of this 3500, and hopefully I do not run poorly. Thanks for watching, and best of luck at the tables.